Hi, and today we're working on uh, another version of replacing the background on a portrait image. And this time we're using a different approach, different technique involving selecting and masking. So we're going to select and mask out the subject from our image. First thing we'll do is create a copy layer, grab our quick selection tool, make sure it's set to plus. And then we just brush our selection onto our subject. And if, as quite frequently happens, we go too far with the selection, we can just switch to our minus brush to reverse that. And we can do some cleanup because we need to add this ear into the selection. And we just have a good look at the selection and just try to see areas we've missed. We can also just move into the full interface for select and mask. And here we can use other views which can help us to see deficiencies in our mask. So again, we can do some further additions. Just on some areas that we're not entirely happy with. We can use our refine edge brush just to work on some areas that need filling in a little bit more. And then in output, we can output to a new layer with the layer mask. And that's all I'm going to worry about with this at the moment. Okay, so we've now got our mask. And if we we can bring in our background layer. We can just duplicate layer to bring that in. Control T to transform the background so we can fill the area. And then we want to move this background underneath our mask layer so that our subject now appears on top of the background. Now, there's a sort of very obvious problem with this technique, which is that the selection is not usually accurate enough. And we get these kind of slightly jagged aliased areas, as in here. And also we have this problem that we've quite successfully isolated the subject, and we've sort of placed her on this new background. But it looks pretty terrible, really, doesn't it? Because she doesn't really look like she belongs on this background at all. She just looks like she's from another place. And so the effect is not really all that great. One of the things that we do want to do is if we can select our mask, and we can go into our mask properties, and here we can work on density and feather on the mask. If we reduce density, you'll be able to see what happens to the background. So this is controlling how much of the background is being shown. But we can also work on feather. And as I move feather, as I raise the pixel value of the feather, you'll be able to see that the edges of the selection start to feather and blur slightly. And this is probably the most useful and powerful way of blending the selection in so that it looks like it belongs there a little bit more. And we can work with feather, and I think really until we see the sort of aliased edges disappear. So perhaps there at about 30 pixels. That seems to work for me now. And again, with density, if I feel that the background is just is crazy intense, I can just reduce the density until I get something that I feel reasonably happy with. As always with backgrounds, however excited about the background we may become, it's a good idea to remember that we don't really want the subject of the image to be kind of competing with the background for our attention. So I think if we have density perhaps around 70, we can still appreciate the texture, but it doesn't seem quite so overwhelming. Now, as another approach to blending, because we now have this, we still have this very, very sort of abrupt difference between the background and the subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make another copy of this background, and I'm going to place it above my masked image, but I'm going to change the blend mode to soft light. And now I've got another image of the background, and I can reduce the opacity of this, because what I'm actually looking for is I'm going to leave some of this background detail actually on her face, which you might say, you know, a lot of the time you might say that's exactly what you don't want to do. You don't want background on the model's face. But what I'm looking for is just a sort of fairly subtle echoing of this texture on her face. Perhaps somewhere around, let's try 25% to begin with, 26% is fine. And then I can also, I'm going to mask, because there's certain areas of the face where I'm going to take this texture off altogether. So with my black brush selected, and high opacity. I'm going to remove the texture altogether from her eyes because, as usual, the eyes are kind of pretty much the focus of attention in a portrait image. And since I have carefully edited the eyes to give them impact and colour and shine, I don't really want that to be sort of diluted by the background texture. And I think I may do the same thing with her nice red lips. And I'm also going to reduce opacity, say, to about 50%. And I'm just going to lift some of this texture. Just reducing the texture on her face, because what I'm trying to get to is the point where I feel that she's blending in with the texture background. There's a sort of unity to the image, I think, is what we're after. But it isn't sort of too obtrusive. And now I think I'm going to adjust the opacity to just a question of tweaking it really until you feel comfortable with the result. Some kind of it's like a sort of artistic compromise between the background and the subject. And so there we are. I mean, there's other things we could do with that. We could sort of carry on tweaking. We could experiment with this is the original background layer. We could decide that we'd like to pull that right back and have much less of the background texture. And it's really just a purely subjective, personal taste thing. But perhaps at about that point, say around 50, I think that's quite nice. We've got an effect which gives us, hopefully, gives us what we're looking for, which is that balance between the subject image and the new background, and a balance that just feels sort of harmonious and pleasing, and crucially where the viewer of the image is not going to have that sort of immediate reaction of thinking, hang on, these two images don't belong together, they've just been thrown together. We're trying to create something where the subject and the background feel sort of visually integrated and harmonious, and the overall effect is pleasing. So there we are. That's it really. Just another way of looking at background replacement, particularly relevant to when we're working on portrait images. So I hope that's another useful option for you to think about and experiment with. And so I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll see you on the next video.